All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's conversation with State Senator Jennifer McClellan. My name is Chris King. I'm the president of the Democratic Business Council of Northern Virginia. As we wait for people to get into the webinar, we'll do the obligatory housekeeping items. This is DemBiz. As you all know, we are a networking organization of business progressives based in Northern Virginia, but really with members throughout the Commonwealth. You can visit us at dembiz.org if you'd like to learn more. And we would, of course, encourage you to become a member of DemBiz. That is an annual membership, and it helps sustain the type of programming that we are doing now. Of course, we are online during this pandemic period, after which we hope to go back to in-person events throughout Northern Virginia as soon as possible. Along those lines, I want to thank our sponsors and benefactors to the organization this year. They are Carlos Del Toro, Tom Greason, Luana Russell, Lori McNamara, Michael Cook, and Montez Anderson, and myself. And so, again, encourage you to become a member. It does take some resources to host and to market these events. And we're trying to keep you in touch with Virginia's decision makers, like Senator McClellan and others. So we definitely appreciate your support. We are going to have the same format that we normally have for these webinars. I will ask some questions, and then if you have a question, you can go ahead and type that into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I'll be taking those off and on throughout the course of the next hour or so, and looking forward to a great conversation with State Senator Jennifer McClellan, who is running for governor this year in a field of 5 Democratic candidates. Senator McClellan, good morning. Welcome to DemBiz, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Chris. Thank you for having me.
All right. So if you are not familiar with the senator's bio, she is a Petersburg native, graduated from the University of Richmond, as well as UVA Law School. She has been a practicing attorney. She also served 11 years in the Virginia House of Delegates, and for the past 4 years has served as the state senator in Virginia's 9th district, which is in and around Richmond. Did I get the highlights there?
Did, yes.
All right. So let's just start with a question that you've probably answered 1,000 times, but we got to ask it anyway. You have long experience in Virginia government. You are now running to occupy the governor's mansion. Why now and why governor?
Well, why now and why governor really is an extension of why I got interested in government to begin with. And that is, listening to my parents tell stories of growing up under Jim Crow during the Depression, my own love of history. I came to understand at a very young age that at its best, government is a force for solving problems, making people's lives better, and navigating crisis. At its worst, it's a force that oppresses some for the benefit of others. And that's what motivated me to get involved in politics, electing Democrats when I went to college, and eventually run so that I could be the one making the change. And we're at a crossroads in Virginia. Before COVID, there were many parts of Virginia and Virginians that were being left behind. COVID made that worse. COVID has changed everything. And as we recover, we need a governor who can rebuild our economy, our healthcare and economic safety nets, and our education system in a way that leaves no Virginian behind, in a way that addresses a growing loss of faith that people have in government's ability to solve their problems, and in a way that can unite people and not just create a seat at the table for people and perspectives that have been excluded, but bring that policymaking table out into our communities. And I have the experience to do that, but I bring a new perspective that is needed as we navigate through new challenges that face Virginia as we solve old problems.
Okay. And one question that we're asking to all of the candidates as we interview them as part of this candidate series is, what is your top priority? It seems from what I've seen and read that education is really top of the list for you. In a world, in a state full of really big issues, why did that one stand out more than anything else?
Because education is the key to economic opportunity. It is the key to thriving, healthy communities, and it is the key to a thriving, healthy democracy, as we've seen in the past 4 years. That perspective comes, I'm the daughter of third generation educators. My mother was the first member of her family to go beyond the 8th grade, let alone go to college. And so I've seen firsthand the importance of education in being that great leveler and providing economic opportunity. But in Virginia, the education you get depends still on your zip code. And as we are building the workforce and the entrepreneurs of tomorrow, our education system from birth to career creates that foundation. And I also, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I don't view education in a silo. All issues that we're going to talk about today are interconnected and affect each other. So, but that is why education has always been my top priority from my first days as a member of the House of Delegates.
Okay. And we'll talk about business in and out over the next hour because we are a business group. Connect the dots for me on education and business and the future of Virginia's economy.
So first of all, businesses need workers and businesses need entrepreneurs. And our education system is shaping both for our future. And we really need to align our curriculum to ensure we are teaching students when they graduate, they have the skills they need to get a job. Now, that's just not the skills they need today. They need the skills to be able to adapt. So critical thinking and adaptability, so that if they get a job and that industry disappears, they still have the ability to adapt. And early childhood education is also critical to that. In my mind, early childhood education and childcare are interchangeable. And for our workers, 40% of whom are parents, childcare is critical to their ability to enter the workforce. So I think the business community has recognized that, which is why they have so strongly supported expanding access to early childhood education. And we hear every day from businesses that a lot of the students that come to them in their first jobs don't have the critical thinking skills that they need and don't have all of the skills those businesses need to thrive. And that's directly related to what they're learning or not learning in school.
Right. And of course, a few years ago, we saw a major example of this when Amazon basically had its choice of every metro area in the country to put their HQ to, and they chose Northern Virginia in large part because it had an educated workforce and was used to innovating like you're talking about. How do you address education in a state that has such different types of areas? You've got rural Southwest, you've got Hampton Roads, you've got Richmond, and of course Northern Virginia. How do you do it without trying to do a one size fits all?
Well, you can't do one size fits all, but there are some things that are universal across the board. The funding is a big part of why we have inequity baked into our system. The way we fund our education system is through a formula that looks at every local government and says, based on your tax revenues, which are mostly property taxes, which bake inequity in, what is your ability to pay for your education needs? And then the state will pay the rest. But that formula doesn't look at what else does that locality have to pay for. So it's broken and it skews results. That formula says the city of Richmond can afford to pay more than Henrico and Chesterfield County, which anybody in this area knows is not true. And so we at the state level need to change the formula and invest to make sure we are addressing inequity in our system. Short term, we need to fully fund the Board of Education's recommended standards of quality, which include an equity fund to begin to meet some of those challenges. But we have got to work with our local school divisions to meet the wraparound service needs in their area. If you have school divisions that have high concentrations of poverty, a lot of kids who face trauma every day, a lot of kids who live in food deserts, a lot of kids who have social service or mental health needs, we have got to help those localities meet those needs in a way that we are not doing today.
Okay. And the $1 million question, not only about education, but every proposal that you and others have put forward is, how do you pay for it?
Your budget sets your priorities. And any of you, when you're setting a budget for your business, you know you have got to do it in a way that is the most efficient and makes sense. early investments in early childhood education and our K-12 system makes savings down the road. If you are investing in early childhood education and having universal early childhood education, you pay less to close the achievement gap when these kids get to kindergarten and beyond. There are many societal costs that you don't have to pay down the road if you are making those early investments. Our economy is dramatically changing. Part of why we are actually faring better than we thought we would is because of the rise, the rise in internet sales tax. And there are new sources of money that we can use to prioritize these early investments that will help us save money down the road. But your budget shows your priorities. And my top priority is our education system from early childhood, really birth to career.
Okay. And it sounds also like you are taking a holistic approach, not only in what you're saying here, but recognizing that everything is interconnected. Everything leads back to business in one way or another, which is why I find this organization important and interesting. Let's shift a little bit to business, and we can get back to education in a bit. But I guess on a philosophical level, a practical level, what is your view of business? Why is it important?
Well, everybody needs a job, and everybody needs services and goods, and it's the business community that provides both. It is just an integral part of our society. And I think that there's a symbiotic relationship between business and workers. They need each other to survive and to thrive. And so I look at the business community, again, holistically, with what are the goods and services that the business community is providing to the community at large, and the jobs they are providing to the community at large. And how do we find that balance between business and workers so that each are helping sort of each other thrive? So that's my overall philosophical view of business.
And that balance right now is really out of whack because Virginia is basically year in and year out recognized as a top 5 state for business, but also a bottom 5 state for workers. How do we fix that?
Well, Washington State was able to be both top for business and top for workers in 2016. And so if they can do it, we can do it. But going back to how everything is interconnected, part of how they were number 1 for business was because they had a strong, talented workforce and an education system that helped both train workers and attract businesses and employees. Because when businesses are looking for where they're going to go, they want to know, what's the quality of life going to be for my employees? Am I going to have that talented workforce? Are there going to be policies that allow me to innovate? And we'll get into this a little bit later, but sometimes you will have changes in business models, changes in technology that affect business, and government is sometimes too slow to adapt. And so part of being top for business is making sure you are able to help businesses adapt proactively, not reactively. On the worker side, we have got to make sure that business that we as a government and our businesses are supporting workers and not profiting off their backs without benefit. And, we got to be honest at how this country and how this Commonwealth started. We started as a business venture for a group of men from England to exploit the natural resources of the Algonquin people that were already here. And then the first Africans came and were put into service to them. And then women were recruited as wives to be in service to them. But the top priority at the time was business and making a profit, literally off of the free labor of people. So from the beginning of our Commonwealth, the balance has been skewed. And for the past 401 years, we have been trying to correct that so that people are not broken and business is not built on their backs without them having, their needs met.
Okay. And I believe during a gubernatorial forum with yourself and three others a few nights ago, the question of right to work was posed. I had read that you were the only one who did not believe that right to work should be repealed. First of all, am I getting that right? And what are your
I did
thoughts
not
on it?
say that. First of all, I did not say that. I
Oh,
was
okay.
the only one who did not proactively say I would repeal it.
Gotcha.
But
Okay.
it's not a no answer, because here's the issue. Our right to work laws include one provision that I think we need to be very careful in how we repeal. Our right to work laws say that employment will not be conditioned on whether you are or are not a member of a union. I strongly believe that union membership should be a personal choice. That belief is rooted in the fact that during the Great Migration, there were many unions that didn't allow Black laborers to join, and there were closed union shops that then they couldn't get jobs. There are many reasons why someone might not want to join a union. That is their right. There are many reasons why someone would want to join a union. That is their right. Employment shouldn't be conditioned on that. Having said that, if you are at a place that has a union and a collective bargaining agreement and you benefit from it, or you benefit from that union representing you in a grievance process, you should have to pay to contribute to the costs of that union getting you those benefits and not be a free rider. So it's not a yes or no answer, but both business and, a lot of people want it to be a yes or no answer. We have to make sure we are finding that balance.
All right, and I want to ask you about a few other, first of all, thank you for clarifying that. I want to ask you about a few other initiatives that it looks like you would like to prioritize when it comes to Virginia's economy. One is to make it a hub of social entrepreneurship. Another is to reduce red tape for craft breweries, which I think we can all get behind, and also pass the Virginia Clean Economy Act. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, so I have done a lot of work to modernize our laws. Those are examples of where new business models needed changes in the laws to thrive. And so with craft brewing, I had a friend that came to me and said, "Look, I would love to open a craft brewery, but under our laws, we have to own all of the equipment in the building, and that access to capital is the biggest barrier." But he had a friend who had a brewery who had excess capacity. He's like, "I want to be able to contract to use his equipment." I'm like, "Well, that makes sense." So we had to change the law. According to the Virginia Manufacturers Association, that bill plus another one that allowed tasting rooms were the two things that led to the explosion of the craft brewing industry in Virginia. Social entrepreneurship. I recognize this trend of conscious capitalism that was coming. Benefit corporations were starting to crop up all around the country, and they wanted to come to Virginia, and the laws didn't allow it. And so I put the bill in to allow benefit corporations, and now we have many in Virginia. So these are just, and then the Clean Economy Act, that solved two problems. We have got to address climate change, and one of the largest contributors is fossil fuels. So the Clean Economy Act put us on the road to 100% clean energy, took Virginia from the back of the pack as far as states to near the top for clean and renewable resources, and unshackled solar and wind and energy efficiency, which is estimated to create 13,000 jobs a year. And so even in the midst of COVID, the solar industry in Virginia is booming because we unleashed the potential of that industry by getting rid of laws that were not based on technology, but just policy decisions that kept solar from thriving in Virginia.
And that seems like such a major component of policy in general is when to get out of the way, when to clear the road, and then when to step in strategically to make sure that things are going the way they should. I read, I think just yesterday or the day before, of all things, about Europe's COVID response. And one of the reasons that they're really struggling with it is because rather than opt for speed like so many other countries did, they opted for consensus among all their member countries, and that just bogged everything down. And then they were lower on the list for vaccines and so on and so forth. How do you strike the balance correctly from issue to issue between speed and consensus?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I think the first step is just sitting down and objectively looking at what is the problem I'm trying to solve? How urgent is the problem I'm trying to solve? And what are the barriers in the way to solving it? But you have to make sure that you have all of the affected stakeholders at the table. And you may not be able to get them all to agree, but you will get perspectives that you otherwise wouldn't think about. And so depending on the urgency of the problem, you work through and say, what's the best solution that is going to get me there with the least amount of unintended consequences or negative consequences? And let's get there. And that is how I approach governing on every issue is what is the problem we're trying to solve? Who's affected and needs to be in the room? What are the unintended consequences? And more often than not, who's going to pay for it? And let's get as far as we can to solve the problem as quickly as possible. If we can't get 100% of where we need to go, but we get better than status quo, let's get where we can go and then keep pushing.
Sounds good. Want to remind folks that if you have a question for Senator Jennifer McClellan, you can type it into the Q&A box, and I'll be choosing those as we move through this hour, start with those in just a few minutes. I want to ask you one more business question before we move on to something else. How will you attract businesses to Virginia?
So, we talked about it early on. When businesses are looking for where to go, they look at your education system. Do you have a transportation network that allows them to move people and products efficiently? What's the quality of life? What's the cost of living? What's the regulatory environment? I think we need to recognize coming out of COVID, our top priority is not going to be attracting new businesses. It's going to be stabilizing and growing the businesses that are already here and hurting. And a lot of times in the past, the priority has been go find the big new businesses and bring them here. And that's been at the expense of Virginia-based, especially small businesses, but businesses here that if we invested in them could help them grow. We've got to find that balance. But as a result of the current, like in this economic recovery, there are not going to be as many of the big deals of businesses looking to move. It's going to be more, there'll be some, but it's going to be more, how do we stabilize and grow the businesses that are already here and are struggling to get back on their feet?
You read my mind on my next question, which is COVID related. So what are the steps that we have to take going forward? And in particular, if you were to take office at the beginning of next year, what would be your first steps specifically related to COVID to get the state's businesses going again?
So I'm not waiting until I get into office. I've been, since COVID began, really diving into how has COVID impacted different industries, because it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. I have the benefit of being on the Senate Finance Committee. We get an update every month from the Secretary of Finance on Virginia's economy in different sectors. And it is clear that the people-facing businesses, so hospitality, brick and mortar retail, healthcare, they're struggling the most. Small businesses, they're struggling the most. There are a couple of different things we've got to do. Some of them, they're struggling because trends they had 3 to 5 years to plan for, they immediately have to plan for. So brick and mortar retail, restaurants, if they had an online presence, they fared a little bit better than if they didn't. Brick and mortar retail was already struggling with the fact that customers didn't want to come in, they're buying more online. That's increased 22% since COVID started. It's not going to reverse. So they're trying to figure out experiences to get their customers in the door. In some cases, that's going to require us to change our laws. What we did for restaurants when we allowed them to have order out, takeout alcohol, that was one example, but there are many, many more. So making sure we recognize how COVID has impacted each of our industries and what we as a state can do to help them recover. And then, let the industries that are already surviving and thriving, so technology, clean energy is 2 examples, kind of monitor what they're doing, but they don't need our help. If they do need us to remove some barriers, great, we'll work with them to do that, but it cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach.
We talked about the holistic approach to business and governing generally, and one really hard lesson of this pandemic has been the importance of childcare. So many people cannot go to work because they have to take care of their kids, or they work from home and their kids are crawling all over them during these Zoom calls. I've had that myself. So talk about the connection between childcare and business, and how you plan to address that.
This was a problem before COVID. And by the way, if you're wondering, I'm coming to you from my 5-year-old daughter's room, who's downstairs doing virtual kindergarten.
My compliments on the butterflies in the background.
Thank you. You know, 90% of the job losses in December were mostly women, and a direct result of not having childcare. Access to quality, affordable childcare was a problem before COVID, especially for infant care. So we have got to address it. I have a plan. You can go to my website at jennifermcclellan.com for universal childcare that will make sure that no family pays more than 7% of their income for childcare. But first, we've got to stabilize and grow the childcare industry. And again, I use childcare and early childhood education interchangeably. Mm-hmm. We've got to stabilize it, grow it, and make sure that our providers, our teachers, are paid with their worth, and restructure how we finance it. Because right now, to get the quality you need, which is paying more for the workforce, in part paying for the buildings and everything, all those costs are directly passed on to parents. And if we don't address how subsidies are used and have more government investment, and we need the business community to be partners in this, because government can't do it all. In some cases, it's going to be public-private partnerships. In some cases, it's going to be the nonprofit community. And in some cases, it's going to be school divisions. We have got to incentivize businesses to have on-site childcare where possible. We as a Commonwealth need to do that. We have some, we need to expand it. 40% of Virginia workers, I think it's Virginia, that could be a national number, but 40% are parents. We have got to address this going forward and look at childcare as a benefit, just like any other benefit we provide our employees. But it's also the foundation for our education system. Because when my son started kindergarten, his teacher told me the biggest change she saw in her 20 years of teaching was kindergarten used to be where the soft skills were taught. Now it's all academic. And she can tell on day one which kids have had formal early childhood education and which ones haven't. And she spends the first part of the school year trying to bridge that gap. And as a result, it keeps her from moving kids forward for where they need to be, because she's trying to pull along the ones who weren't yet ready for kindergarten. We have got to address this both. It is an economic issue and it is an education issue. And we have got to treat it as the urgent crisis. It already was before COVID, but now it's even worse.
And it really requires a lot of leadership and sales skills, really, because it's not a very glamorous issue. It's just one of those nuts and bolts things that's foundational to business, like you're talking about. I want to get to, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, one more thing. It is critically important you have people who are affected by it in the room. One of my biggest frustrations with conversations about how to reopen work and get people back to work is no one was talking about childcare. It's like people can't go back to work if they don't have anywhere to send their kids, especially when school's closed. So having people in the room who are working parents who are like, hey, what about childcare, was critical to centering that perspective.
Agreed. All right, let's get to a question here from our great President-elect, RJ Narang. Senator, could you articulate some of your policy differences with the other candidates running for governor in the Democratic primary? Obviously, there's a range of issues, maybe one or two that stand out to you.
Yeah, I think the biggest differences are just approach, governing style, and experience and perspective. I think those are the biggest differences as far as I can see. And I am always trying to find the right balance to get us as far down the path of solving our problems as we can possibly go to solve those problems. And so I think that's probably the biggest difference between my opponents and I.
Why are you the best general election candidate?
Because I can win. Virginia is a blue state when voters come out and vote. And we showed that in the last election with President Biden winning by 10 points. We have got to make sure that a lot of those voters, many of them were first-time voters, of younger voters, voters of color. We have got to make sure they come out and vote in this election. COVID showed them that it's important who the governor is, but we need a candidate and a campaign that is going to reach out to every corner of this Commonwealth and leave nobody behind and excite them, get them excited about coming out to vote. And what I have seen traveling around Virginia, even virtually through the polls, Virginia is ready for the next generation of leadership, someone who brings a new perspective, but somebody with the experience to get things done. And that is me. I have 30 years of experience from when I started out as a young Democrat at the University of Richmond to even last year, campaigning, even if it's on behalf of other people, all across this Commonwealth. I have built relationships and coalitions across this Commonwealth and can mobilize them to win using both a strong grassroots field operation that gives people something to vote for and not just something to vote against.
What is your assessment of where the Democratic Party is right now? We've always been a Big Tent party, but it seems like right now we've got a strong pull from the left. We've got a school of thought that says we need to stay moderate because we can attract middle of the road voters. Where do you see yourself, and how will that play in the general election this year?
I see myself, I am a pragmatic progressive. At the end of the day, voters want to know who's going to solve my problems, who is going to help me get access to a good job that pays well, who is going to help my kids get good education and give them an opportunity to do better than I did, who is going to make sure that when I get sick or injured, I can get care that won't bankruptcy. And they want a party and a candidate who is going to meet them where they are and listen to them and help address their problems. They don't care, most of them, what you call yourself. They want to know, are you going to solve my problems? And if we center that as a party, then we will win. And that's how we have won in the past, is building these broad coalitions, not choosing between one school of thought or another, but going out and meeting voters where they are, and with a message that resonates with them, that you are going to be the candidate to solve their problems.
That relates. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm done.
Okay. That relates to a question that we've got also from Lauren Hershey, talking about the messaging in the different parts of Virginia. Clearly, we need to get through to folks, but how do we get through?
We show up. We show up. We listen. We talk to them empathetically. We meet them where they are and talk to them in modes of communication that they understand and can access. We don't just focus on, sometimes I feel like consultants get together in a room and they say, okay, this is going to be the message this year. Now every candidate is going to have this cookie cutter campaign that uses this message or this buzzword. That's not what people want. People want you to come and talk with them, listen to them, and show them you care. I can't tell you how many times, I've had town hall meetings. I had a woman tell me one time that for years she didn't vote because she didn't think her vote would matter. And she didn't think anybody really cared. And that I was the first elected official that made her feel that I actually cared about her problems and wanted to do something about them. And she came out and voted for me every time she could. That is what we've got to do as a party to win. And the sooner we recognize that, the more elections we'll win. We're doing a pretty good job right now. We need to keep it up.
Is there a defining experience in your life where you were one person before that experience and maybe a totally different person after that experience, that especially outside of politics?
This is a hard one because, we are the total sum of our life experiences. So it's hard to pick just one, but probably becoming a parent. I think it changed me both personally and politically. Because for the, when your whole perspective changes in that you are shaping the life and the future of another human being that you love with all your heart. And so your priorities shift a little bit, but your perspective also shifts. I did it a little backwards in that I got elected to office and then got married and had kids. So some people say, oh, your kids probably taught you patience. Actually, being a Democrat, being a Black woman Democrat who was young from the most Democratic district in the state in a General Assembly that was mostly white men, Republicans over 50, that taught me patience. And that really helped when I had kids. But they keep me grounded. My daughter, when COVID started, she thinks she's going to be a YouTube star. She grabbed my phone and recorded a video. And she said, COVID's been really hard to us, but get some joy in there. And just that innocence of no matter how bad things are, you can still get some joy in there. Helps keep me grounded even when everything seems like it's terrible. I look at her and I look at my son and I say, you know what? We can still get some joy in there.
It reminds me of a quote from Winston Churchill where he said, I'm an optimist. There doesn't seem much sense in being anything else.
Yeah.
He's right. What is your best leadership quality, you think?
Probably my empathy, my ability to, first of all, I'm a huge nerd who thinks a lot. And
this is recording, so this is for posterity, okay. Just so you know.
I wear my nerddom with pride. So I can sit back and observe and think and see the big picture and recognize when people are talking past each other, because I'm listening to everyone empathetically to try to meet them where they are. And then I can help them talk to each other and not past each other. I've done that as a legislator. I've done that as a daughter, as a sister, in my community, in my caucuses. And I think that's my best quality.
I'm going to go on a rant here real quick, because empathy is one of those things that gets a bad rap. People who throw that word out kind of get ridiculed for it sometimes, but in reality, empathy is something that inspires some of the boldest things that we ever do. If you think about the process of being empathetic and then taking action as a result of that, that's almost never easy action. It's always tough, and hopefully at some point as a human race, we can get to the point where empathy is actually recognized as a strength and not a weakness.
Yeah.
All right, I want to ask you a couple questions that are coming in from our viewers. Michael Cook wants to know, what did we learn from COVID about our public health system, and what do we need to do to prepare for the future?
Our healthcare safety nets weren't ready. They were stretched to the breaking point, mainly because of lack of investment and planning, and they are broken. And so I think that's the number one lesson, is we've got to get those safety nets back on their feet. And I include in that, emergency care centers, our Medicaid system, all of that, free clinics. We also learned our communication strategies don't meet people where they are. My biggest frustration with COVID was how low-income communities, non-English speaking communities, many of whom are they're the ones that have the essential workers. They're the ones who have people who are most at risk. They got information the slowest, and in some cases, not at all. I spent 2 weeks during the early part of the pandemic trying to figure out how to get a flyer to people in a community that used to be in my house district. These are the same families that get information when a flyer is put in their kid's backpack at school, because they're not watching press conferences, they're not on social media, they're not connected to the internet. They're probably not watching the 6 o'clock news. And I tried to get a flyer that just explained, here's why you need a mask. Here's how you get a mask or how you make a mask. And I couldn't get anybody to get that done. So finally, I just did it myself. That's ridiculous. So we've got to strengthen both the public health system, but the communication system to connect people to it who are the most vulnerable.
All right. Separate issue here from Beverly Majida. Beverly, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. What will your immigration policy be for maintaining safe havens for undocumented immigrants in Virginia?
So first of all, it has been so nice to not have to be on the defensive in the General Assembly fighting against policies that really made our immigrant community unsafe, like bills to ban sanctuary cities and things like that, and bills that wouldn't give services to undocumented immigrants. To me, government's role is to solve the problems of all people who live here. And I've enjoyed being able to proactively do that now by making sure that immigrants can drive. Now we've got to protect their privacy and make sure that their data is not being shared with ICE. It is the federal government's job to regulate immigration. It is our job at the state level to provide the services that Virginians need, regardless of their immigration status, and that we are creating safe and healthy communities for them, just like we are for everybody else, that we are accessible as a government to them, including making sure our services and our information is provided in languages they understand. And I've been proud of the work we have done to do that since Democrats took control. I will center diversity and inclusion in every aspect of state government, including for our immigrant population.
And by the way, that's good for business. We've talked
great.
On other webinars about the Northern Virginia community has a very large immigrant community, and many of those people start businesses. In many cases, it's the only Indian supermarket or the only Greek supermarket in the region, and it just adds tremendously to the region overall. So that makes sense. Another question here from John Cartmill. Virginia gets a lot of federal dollars, especially for defense. Could you talk about your relationship with our senators and congressional representatives?
So very good. I've known Mark Warner since I was president of the State Young Democrats, and he was party chair. And Tim Kaine was my mayor. He actually officiated my wedding. So I talk to them all the time about sort of issues between state and federal government. The same with our congressional delegation. I have known many of them, even Republicans. I served with Rob Whitman. We don't agree on a lot, but I served with him and Morgan Griffith. And again, we have to work together with our federal partners and our local partners to make sure that we are all working together to solve the problems and meet the needs of Virginians.
Okay. Want to get back to a business question. Minimum wage is one of the hottest topics right now. What is your informal rough math on that when people talk about increased spending power and a living wage for people who need it, but maybe a real challenge for particularly some small businesses to take that on? Where do you stand on that, and how do you see it shaking out on a net?
Had we indexed the minimum wage a long time ago, it would be much higher than it is right now, and we wouldn't have to be worried as much about that balance. So, but look, I don't know about you. I don't know if you've ever tried to live off of what you would make if you had $15 an hour itself. I did that challenge when I was on the House Commerce and Labor Committee. It is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And we pay for that on the back end through a lot of different services, trying to address homelessness, you name the issue. Many of our issues are because wages have not kept up with the cost of everything else. We need to work with our businesses that find it difficult to meet the $15 an hour. We need to work with them to figure out how to help them get there as quickly as possible. because it will eventually pay for itself. If you are making more, you have more spending power to put back into our communities and into the business community as well. But we can't just kick the can down the road and say, oh, we can't figure out how to do it, so let's not do it. We've got to start that process, and we've got to get to $15 an hour as quickly as possible. And there are many jobs that were excluded from the minimum wage altogether, and those policies were rooted in Jim Crow. And I've been proud to remove those exemptions for domestic workers, for home care workers, and the next step is farm workers. And I know that's a controversial issue, but that was work that used to be done for free. And then for very, very low wages. We have got to begin to address that.
How do you work with a business that would struggle with that $15?
Well, first we need to, working with them to figure out what is it about their business model that makes it difficult for them to meet that. And does it require, if they're having difficulty, which many small businesses do, just with access to capital in general, then how do we work with them to address that access to capital problem? It's the problem getting to $15 an hour is probably, intermingled with other issues. So let's sit down with those industries and say, what is it about your industry and your business model that makes this so hard? And then let's work together to find the solution. I don't have an answer for every single industry, but I need to work with them to get the answer.
What would you say is your proudest achievement as a legislator?
That's a hard one. Probably the Clean Economy Act, because when that bill passed, I literally wanted to jump up and shout, the eagle has landed, because it was that transformative for energy policy in Virginia. We built a coalition of clean energy companies and advocates, environmentalists, public health experts. We came together based on data to say, how do we get to 100%? And can we do it in a way that allows, keeps the lights on? And we kept that coalition together. And there were many times along the way that bill could have died. It actually did die at one time, but we kept pushing and got it across the finish line. And it has already transformed the clean energy economy. It will be probably the most impactful bill that I have passed in my 16 sessions.
What would you say is your biggest frustration so far as a legislator? Obviously, you were in the minority for a while.
I've
was there a
blocked
particular bill? What's that?
I've
Forever,
blocked
it seems like.
the years in the wilderness, as I call them. I've blocked a lot. I'll tell you, this year it was my workplace safety bill. I think that's what we call it. So last year when we passed the Virginia Values Act, we did not define sexual harassment or workplace harassment. And so I had a bill this year that would have done that, which would have provided criteria for courts to look at to figure out if something is harassment. And I'm not only disappointed that it didn't pass, but presenting that bill showed me yet again how important it is to have women's perspectives at the table. Because the first set of questions I got in one of the committees made it very clear to me that the bill was needed, because I was getting questions like, well, is this harassment? Is this harassment? Is this harassment? And I'm like, the fact that you're asking me that tells me why we need this definition. Mm-hmm. And it reinforced for me that everyone's political views and policy views are shaped by their life experience and what we know. And because the General Assembly and our state government does not reflect the full diversity of our Commonwealth, the perspectives that are not fully represented their issues aren't resolved. So I think that was my biggest frustration.
And it should be noted, as has been noted many times, that both you and Jennifer Carroll Foy are running to become the first African-American female governors in the country, which is, it's crazy that it could have taken this long. But speaking of representation, there you go. Question from Eddie Itches. Eddie, again, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Will you provide a living wage immediately by executive order for state workers?
I would definitely consider it. I would, doing that, I have to make sure that the budget funds it. And so I would have to look at our budget situation and make sure I can do that in a way. I can't by executive order change the budget. So it might require legislation and budget to make it effective. So with that caveat, I'm definitely open to it.
Question from Lisa Wetzel. Do you have a plan to improve broadband throughout the state? Would you promote internet service being treated as a utility?
So the parts of this is not unique to Virginia. This is a national issue. The parts of Virginia and the parts of the country that are not connected are the most expensive to connect. So the bottom line of my plan is we have got to invest in getting the infrastructure either in the ground or in the air to connect the parts of Virginia that are not connected. The federal government's helped a lot with the new stimulus money coming in, both specific for broadband, what they're doing at the national level, and more money they're giving to localities and state governments to do that. Our grant program through the Virginia Telecommunications Initiative for years was limited to localities that have private partners. We've removed that restriction. I would put more money in the grant fund. We started the process of mapping what parts of the state are unserved and underserved, and they need to be the priorities for our grants. And we need to work with our localities to help find the specific technology that works for them, because different technologies work better given the geography you have and the density that you have. So it's not going to be a one size fits all approach, but we have got to work with our local partners and our federal partners to meet the specific broadband needs of our underserved and unserved areas. And then we've got to work on affordability for the areas that are connected, but there's not an affordable product. Again, there's a federal program called Universal Service that has both a federal and a state component. So we've got to work together with our partners to make sure that program is providing low-cost services to the people that can't afford broadband.
I want to shift gears and ask you a personal question. I've watched some interviews with you, and you've mentioned a few times that you're a history buff. I too am a history buff. What is your go-to history topic? Like what time period or issue is your favorite?
Oh, that's a hard one. There are two. And it's changed a little bit. I'm very fascinated by the 1960s, sort of the second civil rights movement, and the Cold War. And, the most fascinating president to me was John F. Kennedy. But that was the second civil rights movement. And the one we're not taught about in school, but more recently I have really delved into, was the period of Reconstruction. I used to be really interested in the Civil War, and I kind of still am. But Reconstruction and the years immediately after Reconstruction, that's when everything went off the rails as far as race relations. That's when Jim Crow was put into effect. And both time periods have one thing in common. Every time in our country, when African Americans in general, but people of color or marginalized groups gain social, political, and economic power, there has been a swift and violent backlash. And the first time was at the end of Reconstruction. That is when racial terror lynchings, Jim Crow laws were put in effect. And that's when most of the Confederate monuments went up. And when the whole lost cause narrative and the lie of white supremacy was put in place to break up the growing coalition between the formerly enslaved and lower income, non-landowning white people. And if you don't, that's not taught in schools. And that is the root of so much of the inequity we still are grappling with today. And if we don't begin to heal and we can't heal until we all learn and understand and talk about that history, we will never fully heal as a people. And so that's probably the time period I have more recently spent the most time delving into.
I totally agree with you. And that is really kind of a dark zone in a lot of people of good faith, as you say, don't really know about the transition from slavery to the present day and all the things that were put in place during that time, which are largely responsible for the way things are now. How do you think things would have been different if Abraham Lincoln had been able to finish his second term?
Oh, so different. I mean, first of all, his whole approach, I don't know if this is an actual quote. I watched a movie where he's talking to General Grant, leading into the peace negotiations. And he says, let him up easy, which Grant kind of frowns at. But Lincoln understood that reconciliation and reconstruction was going to be hard and was going to require empathy and mercy. But he also recognized with the beginning of the Freedmen's Bureau, and there were concrete reparations plans to help integrate the formerly enslaved people into communities with land, giving them land, giving them jobs, that all ended in part because Andrew Johnson didn't believe in it. Mm-hmm. And so you have a president who is trying to thwart efforts to uplift and provide reparations for the formerly enslaved, up against radical Republicans who wanted to very harshly punish the South. And that tension made it impossible for the kind of deliberate reconciliation that we needed coming out of a horrific Civil War.
And Lincoln had called it a rebirth of the country previous to that. And what that means, obviously, is that it's a very tenuous situation. It's touch and go. It requires leadership. It requires soft skills. And that really was just a tremendous blow for that we're still feeling, I think, centuries later.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Cold War. What's your big takeaway from the Cold War?
I think leadership matters. The right person in office at the right time. And if anybody other than John F. Kennedy had been president during the Cuban Missile Crisis, we might not be here today. His ability to remain calm in the midst of chaos, to bring different perspectives and different people around a table to hash out a problem, and listen to all sides, but at the end of the day, trust his gut about what's right and not necessarily trust conventional thinking or what one set of experts is telling you over another. And he learned that because of the Bay of Pigs. And so he learned from his failures when the military and the CIA were all saying, like, we've got this plan, it's going to work, it's going to be great. And then it was an epic failure.
Right.
He learned from that and literally saved this planet, because people do not understand how close we came to a nuclear holocaust during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
I think one of the most compelling things, maybe in history generally, is, as I understand it, he kind of back-channeled a message to Nikita Khrushchev saying that he wasn't sure, meaning Kennedy wasn't sure if he could control his own generals at that point, which is when Khrushchev sort of backed off finally and said, okay, then maybe this is getting a little too hot.
Yeah, and the other thing, Robert Kennedy, and Khrushchev had his own problem. There's this, he sent a letter that they think he wrote himself that showed a path out. And then another letter came the next day that basically said, like, you take your missiles out of Turkey or no deal. And Robert Kennedy said, let's just ignore the second letter. And he went behind the scenes and met with the ambassador and said, look, we can take our missiles out of Turkey. We're planning to do it anyway. We can't do it in response to this threat. And so the ability to not react when you get a threat and an ultimatum, but to like sit back and say, what's the best path forward, is an incredibly important skill.
Yeah, what a loss, Robert F. Kennedy. Things might have been a lot different if he had lived as well.
Yes, yes.
Well, we're coming up on 10:30, and I'm going to make the smooth transition from possible nuclear annihilation to the governor's race in 2021. But want to let people know or remind people that the primary is coming up on June 8th, and early voting starts April 24th. Senator Jennifer McClellan, thank you so much for a great conversation. Best of luck to you on the trail, the virtual trail. And to all of you joining at home, we appreciate your support and for joining us this morning. Thank you for your questions. And we will see you next time for the DemBiz 2021 candidate series. Senator, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, everybody.
All right, take care.